Continuamos con nuestro programa. En estos momentos vamos a someter a consideración el proyecto de resolución L16, revisado 1, titulado Las repercusiones negativas en el goce de los derechos humanos de la no repatriación a los países de procedencia de los fondos de origen ilícito y la importancia de mejorar la cooperación internacional. En ese orden concedo la palabra a la distinguida representación de Túnez en nombre del Grupo Africano. Tiene usted la palabra.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor, on behalf of the African Group, to introduce the draft resolution L16/1 entitled The Negative Impact of the Non-Repatriation of Funds of Illicit Origin to the Countries of Origin on the Enjoyment of Human Rights and the Importance of Improving International Cooperation. It is established according to the principle of self-determination in its economic aspect that all peoples may, for their own ends, freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources with a view to realizing their sustainable development without prejudice to any obligations arising out of international economic cooperation. However, this process has been hampered by fraudulent practices that led to the generation of billion worth of funds of illicit origin, which have been transferred from developing countries in particular. The draft resolution at hand seeks to underline the following: the commitments of state party to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption to prevent and combat corruption more efficiently and effectively, and that the return of assets is one of the main objectives and a fundamental principle of the said convention, and that states party are obligated to accord one another the widest measure of cooperation and assistance in this regard. It underlines also the urgent need to repatriate funds of illicit origin to the countries of origin without conditionalities taken into account due processes. The same resolution calls for the promotion of further international cooperation through, inter alia, the United Nations system in support of national, sub-regional and regional efforts to prevent and combat corrupted practices and the transfer of assets of illicit origin. The draft resolution at hand invites the independent expert on the effect of foreign debt and other related international financial obligation of states on the full enjoyment of all human rights, particularly economic, social and cultural rights, to continue to consider the impact of illicit financial flows on the enjoyment of human rights as part of his mandate. It requests the Advisory Committee of the Human Rights Council to conduct a comprehensive research-based study on the impact of flow of funds of illicit origin and the non-repatriation thereof to the countries of origin on the enjoyment of human rights, including economic, social and cultural rights, with a special emphasis on the right to development, with a view to compiling relevant best practices and main challenges, and making recommendations on tackling those challenges based on the best practices in question, and to present a progress report on the requested study to the Human Rights Council at its 36th session for its consideration. Mr. President, it is our conviction that the gravity of the phenomenon at hand necessitates that the Council consider this issue from all its angles in relation to the enjoyment of human rights. Hence, we call the adoption of this draft resolution by consensus. I thank you.
Gracias. He sido informado por la Secretaría de que hay 3 copatrocinadores adicionales. Concedo ahora el uso de la palabra a aquellos miembros del Consejo que deseen hacer comentarios generales sobre este proyecto. Concedo la palabra a la delegación de Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ghana would like to express its support for Resolution L16, Rev 1, entitled The Negative Impact of the Non-Repatriation of Funds of Illicit Origin to the Countries of Origin on the Employment of Human Rights and the Importance of Improving International Cooperation. Mr. President, for years, developing and emerging economies have endured the negative impact of illicit funds flow, which have and continue to stifle economic development, as well as the progressive realization of human rights, including social and cultural rights and the right of sustainable development. From 2004 through 2013, available statistics indicate that developing and emerging economies lost $7.8 trillion in illicit financial flows. Realization of the 2013 Agenda for Sustainable Development by these countries will be greatly enhanced if member states of the UN join forces to fight the flow of illicit funds at all levels through cooperation. The report of the United Nations High-Level Panel of Eminent Persons on the Post-2015 Development Agenda, published in May 2013, recommended that a global target to reduce illicit flows, and tax evasion and increase stolen assets recovery, should be included in the future United Nations Development Framework. Ghana believes that the time has come for the international community to use resolutions such as L16, Rev 1 to call for implementation of measures to swiftly reduce corruption, illicit financial flows, money laundering, tax evasion, and hidden ownership of assets. To this end, Ghana calls on this Council to demonstrate commitment to this noble cause by adopting Resolution L16 Rev 1 by consensus. I thank you.
La delegación de Egipto tiene el uso de la palabra.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Egyptian delegation is delivering these remarks as one of the main penholders of the resolution submitted by the African Group, entitled The Negative Impact of the Non-Repatriation of Funds of Illicit Origin to the Countries of Origin on the Enjoyment of Human Rights, and the Importance of Improving International Cooperation. Mr. President, it is estimated that the illicit financial flows from Africa ranges from $50 to $60 billion a year, depriving these countries of resources needed to realize human rights, in particular the right to development, which necessitates that the Council consider this issue from all its angles in relation to the enjoyment of human rights, being the United Nations body mandated by the General Assembly Resolution 60/251 to promote universal respect for all human rights and fundamental freedoms. The resolution at hand emphasizes the importance of enhancing international cooperation for the prompt recovery of illicit financial flows, as well as combating corrupt and illegal practices in accordance with United Nations Against Corruption. It also emphasizes the importance of upholding commitments to make the fight against corruption a priority at all levels and to curb the illicit transfer of funds and to apply the principles of accountability, transparency, as well as the participation in the decision-making process regarding the allocation of repatriated funds to the realization of economic, social and cultural rights, and provide effective remedies directed at creating conditions for avoiding new human rights violations. The resolution calls for conducting a study in coordination with relevant UN bodies, namely the United Nations Office for Drug and Crime, UNODC, on the possibility of utilizing non-repatriated illicit funds, including through monetization and/or establishment of investment funds, while completing the necessary legal procedures and in accordance with national priorities, with a view to supporting the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, contributing to the enhancement of the promotion of human rights in accordance with obligations under international human rights law, and to submit the requested study to the Human Rights Council at its 39th session in September 2018. We reached out during the informal consultations to all states, and especially those who may not be in a position today to fully support the resolution, and we regret that our cause and concerns have not yet received the full attention and accommodation from these countries, despite of the constructive engagement from the side of the African group to take into consideration the views and concerns of different states. We fail to understand the position of a number of countries regarding conducting a study by the Advisory Committee of this Council, and we call for the adoption of this resolution by consensus. Thank you, Mr. President.
La delegación de Nigeria tiene el uso de la palabra.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nigeria fully supports the resolutions of the negative impact of the non-repatriation of illicit funds to the countries of origin on the enjoyment of human rights and improving international cooperation in this regard. We urge Member States to support the resolution introduced by Tunisia on behalf of the African Group, which aims at enhancing international cooperation in recovering these proceeds of crime, in particular embezzled public funds, stolen assets, and unaccounted for assets, including those that are found in safe havens. The recovered funds would go into helping the countries of origin to achieve their development plans and fulfill their obligations under international human rights laws and meet the legitimate aspirations of their people. Mr. President, the repatriations of illicit funds to countries of origin is key for states that are undergoing democratizations and reform processes in achieving their development plans. We therefore call upon all states to support the resolutions at hand and to uphold fully their commitments to make the fight against corruption a priority at all levels and to curb the illicit transfer of funds in accordance with the United Nations Conventions Against Corruption, and to make every effort to achieve the repatriation of funds of illicit origin to the requesting states in order to diminish the negative impact of non-repatriation. Mr. President, sir, corruption deprives people from the developmental opportunities, and the Nigerian government is determined to root it out completely. Asset recovery is essential because it restores the trust of the people and constitutes a sanction that reduces the incentive for corruption and at the same time compensate the damages caused. Corruption only makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. It fuels conflicts and violence, destroys nature, and ultimately hurts those who are most in need. For countries to stop corruption, there must be transparency, and without transparency there cannot be accountability and integrity, which are the core of human security. Non-repatriated funds to countries of origin affects the efforts to combat corruption of any government that have placed the fight against corruption as one of its priorities. Nigeria firmly believes that if nothing is done to stop illicit financial flows and to repatriate the funds to countries of origin, it could undermine the values of democracy, rule of law and morality, and jeopardize social, economic and political development. For this reason, we seek the support and cooperation of Member States to adopt this resolution by consensus. Any attempt to break the consensus for one reason or the other on this important resolution L16 will put to doubt our collective responsibility to ensure the respect of rule of law by Member States and fundamental human rights. Willingness already shown towards facilitating the timely repatriation of illicit assets to countries of origin. I thank you, Mr. President.
La delegación de los Estados Unidos de América tiene el uso de la palabra.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States regrets that the Human Rights Council has chosen again to make pronouncements in the highly technical areas that include asset recovery, illicit finance, tax revenue generation, sovereign debt, arms control, and organized crime, which we believe lie outside the appropriate scope of the HRC. We underscore that the Financial Action Task Force is the international standard setter for combating illicit finance. For the following reasons, we must call a vote and vote no on this resolution. Current General Assembly resolutions on this topic, as well as other recent UN decisions and resolutions, strongly recognize the UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, as the groundbreaking and primary binding legal framework for cooperation in asset recovery cases. To date, there are 181 states parties to this convention. Unfortunately, this resolution does not reflect valuable progress made by relevant experts in the UNCAC's Conference of States Parties and its open-ended intergovernmental expert working group on asset recovery to develop and share good practices, promote implementation of the Convention and effective asset recovery, and set common goals through recommendations and resolutions. Instead, for example, this resolution uses outdated and problematic terms and concepts, such as the phrase repatriation of funds of illicit origin. That term is contrary to the provisions of the UNCAC, and expert-level fora elsewhere now use terms asset recovery and return. Similarly, we believe the independent experts' report on this resolution we believe that the independent experts' report that this resolution mentions does not contribute constructively to the literature on asset recovery and return. Other studies, including ones the UN Office on Drugs and Crime / World Bank Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative have completed, cover the complex technical aspects of asset recovery in a manner more in line with the UNCAC and international consensus. We have also worked elsewhere with many delegations in this room to depoliticize asset recovery, including through the Financial Asset Task Force, or FATF. With respect to illicit finance, we recognize the work of the FATF and the related efforts made by experts from around the globe on this issue. This resolution ignores the effective work already underway in other international fora, including the OECD and the UN's Conferences on Financing for Development. We look forward to working with the UN and other appropriate experts in Vienna and elsewhere to address these important issues in appropriate fora. Thank you, Mr. President.
¿Alguna delegación desea hacer uso de la palabra en estos momentos? No. He sido informado por la Secretaría de que no hay consecuencias para el presupuesto por programas para este proyecto de propuesta. Concedo la palabra a los miembros del Consejo para las explicaciones de voto previamente a la votación con respecto a este proyecto. La delegación de Suiza tiene el uso de la palabra.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, sur la base d'une riche expérience dans le domaine du recouvrement d'avoirs, la Suisse a constaté que la conclusion favorable de tels cas n'est possible que dans le cadre d'un partenariat étroit. Un partenariat étroit entre États requis et États requérants. Ainsi, ma délégation regrette cette année à nouveau que cet aspect n'ait pas été suffisamment pris en compte dans le cadre des négociations sur cette résolution, ceci en particulier de la part d'États qui sont impliqués dans de tels cas. Le recouvrement d'avoirs est une responsabilité commune. Ce n'est que dans un tel état d'esprit que l'on peut efficacement lutter contre la corruption. Pour cette raison, la Suisse n'est pas en mesure de soutenir L16 REF 1 et s'abstiendra. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Muchas gracias. La delegación de Alemania tiene el uso de la palabra.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the member states of the EU that are members of the Human Rights Council. This explanation of vote has been agreed by the EU as a whole. The EU acknowledges the engagement of Egypt and Tunisia on behalf of the African Group, which have led the consultation process on Resolution L16 on the negative impact of the non-repatriation of funds of illicit origin to the countries of origin, on the enjoyment of human rights, and the importance of improving international cooperation. However, we reiterate, as in previous years, our view that the resolution under consideration addresses the subject in a way that is at odds with the mandate and expertise of the Human Rights Council. The issue of addressing illegal activities that give rise to illicit funds and asset recovery is already addressed extensively within other international fora and mechanisms, most prominently within the legal framework of the UN Convention Against Corruption and the working groups established thereunder. We can therefore not support the proposed consideration of an intergovernmental mechanism or the request for a study by the Advisory Committee. Not only do we fear that this would create unnecessary duplication or even indeed undermine the valuable work of the working group on asset recovery in Vienna, but we also believe this is not the most effective way to ensure the necessary expertise and implementation on this issue. The Human Rights Council should complement and, more importantly, be consistent with the work of and the terminology and concepts used by the main UN body for dealing with this subject. Finally, we believe that discussions on this issue would benefit from a more balanced approach, giving due weight to the root causes of corruption, embezzlement of public funds, and transnational organized crime and their broader effects. If the Human Rights Council is to add value on the subject, it should be through addressing the specific human rights aspects of it. For the above-mentioned reasons, the EU cannot support Resolution L16, and the EU member states that are member of the Human Rights Council will abstain. Thank you, Mr. President.
Concedo el uso de la palabra a alguna delegación que desee hacerlo en estos momentos. No. A instancias de la delegación de los Estados Unidos de América, el Consejo procederá ahora a la votación registrada con respecto al proyecto de propuesta L16 revisado 1. Pido a la Secretaría que active la máquina de votación y solicito a las delegaciones que registren su voto. Nuevamente, por favor, revisar su voto. La votación ha sido concluida. Los resultados son los siguientes. 30 a favor, 1 en contra, 16 abstenciones. Por consiguiente, el proyecto de propuesta L16 revisado 1 ha sido adoptado. En breve se distribuirán las copias de los resultados de la votación.